2020, Korea. Pre-final fight before competing for the MMA middleweight title. There are already 3 people standing in the ring, 2 fighters and the referee. The whole audience is screaming, supporting their idol. The referee shouted that as they can all see, both sides are showing top-class skills, and it is true that both sides, both fighters, were extremely serious. The referee announced that now the most important moment of the fight will come. He said that wrestler Ji Soo-yuk would attack first. The guy threw himself at the other, already holding his fist at the ready. However, he failed to attack him, for the second wrestler ducked and hit his head right into Ji Soo-yuk's solar plexus. The second wrestler didn't waste any time. He immediately began to attack Ji Soo-yuk a second time. Ji Soo-yuk himself didn't even realize it when he was hit in the cheek by the guy's fist. The referee shouted that his opponent was dodging and throwing a double punch, but Ji Soo-yuk was already getting annoyed, especially with the referee's comments. He was watching his opponent closely and then he realized that he was finally caught. The referee was saying that wrestler Kang Junso was rushing forward. Kang Junso was rushing at Ji Soo-yuk and seemed to be completely confident in his actions. Ji Soo-yuk mentally encouraged Kang Junso to rather attack him. He also pushed himself off the ground. Some bespectacled and pumped-up man in the auditorium shouted that it was still early. This startled Kang Junso. He abruptly stopped and took a fighting stance. Then Ji Soo-yuk's leg flew right into his ear with all its force. Ji Soo-yuk jumped back after being hit. The man with glasses shouted for him to look his opponent in the eye instead of relying on his gut alone. Kang Junso understood and nodded in response. He switched his focus back to Ji Soo-yuk. Ji Soo-yuk started to move. Both the man with glasses and Kang Junso himself realized that it was a fake. Ji Soo-yuk began to attack the opponent. After that, the man with glasses shouted that it was time. Kang Junso's eyes lit up. He dodged his opponent's punch and attacked him too. Ji Soo-yuk was very surprised as he didn't expect anything like this. Kang Junso's fist flew right into Ji Soo-yuk's face, severely skewing his nose and one half of his face. Soon he was on the floor. Ji Soo-yuk fell painfully, hitting his head on the iron net. As Ji Soo-yuk was sprawled on the floor, the referee called a knockdown. He tried to stop Kang Junso, who wanted to keep hammering his opponent further and further, shouting that was it. Stop, the fight was over. The spectators broke out into loud cheers. They were all terribly happy about Kang Junso's victories. Kang Junso sat on the shoulders of a man with glasses and shouted loudly in victory. The referee said that the wrestler Kang Junso from Blue Monster Gym was going to the finals. 3 days to the final title fight. Ahead of them was the Team Blue Monster MMA Gym. Their crest was a blue mighty dragon. Kang Junso looked at the poster that hung on the wall in front. There was him and his future opponent. The poster read, Korea FC, middleweight title fight. The date was March 10, 2020, and the place was XX City, MTC, Champion Shin Do-hyun vs challenger Kang Junso. Kang Junso silently bandaged his hands and stared at the poster. Someone entered the room. It was a pumped-up bespectacled man. He told Junso that he would go meet with the organizers. Kang Junso lastly told the man not to overdo it with the alcohol. The man became a little uncomfortable. He got embarrassed and said to himself that Kang Junso was a smart ass. The man coughed. Suddenly, he noticed something. He turned to Junso, who looked at him questioningly. The man in glasses pointed to a large monitor and asked the guy if he would play, because he hadn't touched it in a while. Kang Junso said no. The man replied that let him do as he knew how. He said that there were 3 days left so he shouldn't overstretch himself. He said goodbye to his apprentice and said he would be on his way. The door closed behind him. Kang Jun smiled and said to himself that it really had been a long time since he had played. 2015, the 6th National Youth Mixed Martial Arts Tournament. Kang Junso and a man with glasses were in a gym. There was a sign on top that had the year and the name of the event. Junso was badly beaten up and exhausted. The man wasn't cheerful either. He turned to Junso. He said he told the same thing. Just wish like he did in sparring. Junso replied that it wasn't the same as when he was sparring. His eyes were running confusedly. He said he was being jumped on as if he really wanted to kill. He thought about how his eyesight was excellent, his reactions were fast, his stamina was strong. Kang Junsua couldn't believe that the treasure he had come across for the first time in 20 years had such a weak psyche. The man with glasses was silent. Then he put a hand on the poor guy's shoulder. He suggested he try again. The guy was wearing VR goggles. He was screaming loudly, all because there was a VR zombie attack in front of him. In his eyes, the zombies were attacking him from all sides. They had red eyes and sharp teeth. Kang Junso asked what the hell was this. In fact, it was a special workout for the weak psyche. The poor guy fell painfully to the floor. Even though the opponents weren't real, but the terror he was feeling right now was the very real thing. Kang Junso was being told to conquer his fear. The poor guy was screaming at the coach that he couldn't do it. He was begging him to stop when the coach loudly addressed him by name. The man with glasses grabbed Kang Junso's arm and told him to focus and clench his fists, yelling for him to punch with the thought that his punches would crush any enemy. The intimidating monsters roared and came closer and closer to Kang Junso. One zombie flew to the floor. A lot of blood flew out of its mouth. The head itself was twisted to the other side. That zombie fell at the feet of the others. The others looked at him judgmentally. Then a system notification popped up at level 1. The first zombie was successfully defeated. Now the nightmarishly starey zombies were staring at Kang Junso with a blank stare. The guy was practicing breathlessness and looked at his fist that he had just struck the first zombie with. The man with glasses shouted loudly that he had done well. Soon a notification came in that it was already level 3. He was asked to eliminate all the zombies of Zone 31. The zombies were all throwing themselves at the enemy. Next came the notification that passed for level 8, because all the zombies were eliminated. The man with glasses also took a fighting stance. Kang Junso killed the monster one by one, and so the notification came that the level was upgraded to 13th, then to 25th. Another monster spat out a considerable amount of blood. Kang Junso was extremely tense. He wasn't scared right now, but there was a set task to kill everyone. He finally decided to use his legs. Then he was already informed that he had reached the maximum level, for zombies had been eliminated in all territories and the title of zombie killer had been obtained. In the game his hair was ashy and long and his body was pumped up. The character was quite pointing his hand at himself while standing in the middle of a pile of zombie corpses. Kang Junso finally took off his VR goggles. He looked pleased and looked at the trainer. A little while later, he was sitting by the man with the glasses on his shoulders as usual, cheerfully celebrating his victory over the zombies. It was already evening outside. The lights were on in the houses. Kang Junso was lying on the tile floor and said that he was having flashbacks, saying that it was probably because the final battle was coming up. Suddenly, someone called out to Hyung. Some anxious guy in a white suit burst into the room. Kang Junso asked what it was in him and if something was wrong. Then, he said something that shocked the protagonist from the first words. He was saying that their coach. He didn't need to finish the sentence, because it seemed Kang Junso already understood everything. Up ahead was a large building. Somewhere there were lights on in the windows and somewhere not. A sign on top said it was Jianmen Central Hospital. The guys rushed through the hospital with all their legs, calling for their coach. In front of them was the main operating department. That's where they were headed. On a bench outside the ward sat an elderly woman and a teenage girl, both of them shedding tears. Soon, all four of them were standing in front of each other. Kang Junso asked the lady to tell what happened. She replied that they said that the cab had been involved in an accident. Suddenly, the door of the operating room opened. A group of doctors came out from there. One of them briefly said that they were very sorry. Then everything inside Kang Junso fell apart. He couldn't even fully realize it all. Now there was no person who had put him on his feet, who had supported and mentored him. 3 days later, the Korean MMA middleweight title fight. There were 3 people in the ring again, the referee and 2 fighters. Kang Jun-sung was clearly out of sorts, the referee saying that wrestler Kang Junso, the wrestler who gusted up in a gust of wind, continues to disappoint them tonight. Said that his haphazard movements were different from the sharp and precise punches the athlete was known for. He couldn't seem to focus on the fight at all. The referee said that the fighter is probably affected by the absence of his coach Sun Jong-nam, while the other said that he was right. It was a very sad case, but at the moment the athlete should give himself to the fight. The referee was sure that Coach Song, who had gone to heaven, also wished that. Kang Junso was very tense. Suddenly, his opponent's head flew into his stomach. The opponent grabbed Kang Junso's legs and threw him to the floor. He piled on the guy with all his weight. They started fighting on the floor. The referee was yelling that wrestler Shin Do-hyun did a takedown and his attack knocked the athlete Kang Junso down, saying that the fight had gone to a granting. Hyun was shouted to do a turnaround and not just lie there. Kang Junso did indeed turn over. Shin Do-hyun subsequently hit him hard on the head with his fist. The blow was so strong that everything swam in front of the protagonist's eyes. A guy from his Blue Monster Club went to the referee. He yelled that such punches were a violation of the rules. The man in black grabbed Shin Do-hyun, and the referee said it seems that the wrestler Shin Do-hyun hit his opponent in the back of the head area, saying that's right. The referee warns the athlete. The guys from the club asked Hyun if he was okay. He finally got up and rubbed his head and said yes, he was fine. Boxing was announced. Kang Junso was once again standing opposite his opponent, Shin Do-hyun. Kang Junso exhaled and thought about how low it was. He had darkness and a massive muscular body in front of him. The guy didn't realize what else it was and shook his head to dispel what was probably a vision. Poor Kang Junso asked himself what was wrong with his eyes. He was staring at the floor. Then he looked up and once again he didn't see Shin Do-hyun in front of him. Now there stood a terrifying monster with glowing eyes and blood smeared all over his body. Kang Junso couldn't believe his eyes. He wondered who else it was. It felt like there was only him and the monster. Suddenly, from behind, someone grabbed his shoulder. Kang Junso turned around abruptly. It was the spirit of a trainer with glasses. The man was smiling at his student, and Hyun himself was amazed to see him here. Kang Junso was already standing in front of the coach. Tears came to the guy's eyes. He reached out to the man and asked what happened to him. Kang Junso wanted to touch him. However, Sung Jong-nam immediately began to dissolve. The man smiled at his strongest disciple to the last, while Kang Junso screamed and begged him not to leave him. The tears were much thicker now. Hyun wanted to catch Sung Jong-nam and not let him in again, but unfortunately, it was beyond him. Kang Junso was distracted by the loud roar of a monster from behind. He turned around. The monster looked extremely terrifying, its eyes glowing red and its mouth drooling. Shin Do-hyun prepared to attack Kang Junso again. The terrifying monster that resembled Shin Do-hyun also attacked the guy with its long black claws, accompanied by a loud scream. Poor Kang Junso screamed loudly in fear and fell to the floor, covering his head with his hands. The referee asked what was wrong, saying that the wrestler Kang Junso was lying on the floor with his hands over his head. He asked if the blow to the back of his head was to blame, even though he had just been doing fine. The man in black was holding Shin Do-hyun back so that he wouldn't suddenly attack again. Kang Junso finally opened his eyes. However, there was no ring or Shin Do-hyun in front of him, only a terrifying monster. The guys from the Blue Monster Gym Club were screaming. They didn't understand what was even going on, telling Hyun to come to his senses, asking what he was doing. The guy who alerted the main character about the incident with the trainer yelled his name loudly, trying to finally bring him to his senses. The referee in the ring shook his head negatively. He was standing between the wrestlers. In the end, the wrestler Kang Junso was declared defeated by TKO. A TKO is a technical knockout. Shin Do-hyun merrily celebrated his championship win, and Kang Junso was left lying there. 2 years later, it was evening. The lights were on in the houses. There were many eatery signs. You could hear the sound of the intercom and the words that an infectious delivery had arrived, and then a notice of a new order. Itaewon Street, 33. The uniformed guy put his helmet back on. He started up his blue moped and drove on to deliver the infectious delivery. The roofs of the houses were horribly uniform. Some massive guy, breathing heavily, was running away from something or someone. There was another man chasing him. He was wearing pants and a black-orange shirt. His hair was bleached. He was telling the athlete he was chasing that it was okay to run away, because he was going to catch him anyway. The athlete was thinking that he wouldn't have stopped if he had been in his place, thinking about how much pain he had been through. He ran towards the road where a blue motorcycle was coming out. It scared the guy a lot, because he wouldn't be able to slow down now, and he screamed loudly. The sportsman flew lightning fast over the transportation, making an incredibly perfect fold. But unlike him, the delivery man slowed down. He was looking in the wake of the fleeing guy when someone called out to him. Suddenly, the delivery guy slammed hard into the moped. They both flew off in different directions and the moped flipped over. Now the delivery man and the catching up guy were sitting on the road, but sadder was the fact that the box of food also fell down and the cola flew the other way. The white-haired guy must have hit his shoulder hard. He looked at the delivery man and cursed loudly. But he wasn't going to deal with anything right now, so he just walked away. The delivery man looked at the pizza, a slice of which had fallen out of the box, and the whole box was covered in sauce. Suddenly, he got a notification. The message was from a work center. The sender called the delivery man Kong Junso and said he was sending him a request from a customer. He asked him to hurry up. The customer also laughed and wrote to him not to strain the Coke, and if he didn't arrive within 5 minutes, he would have to cancel the order. It turned out that this delivery man was Kong Junso. He was looking at his phone and the Coke was spilling in front of him with a splash. Then Kong Junso looked at the guy who was already running away. He started to take off his helmet. After taking it off, he exhaled loudly. Kong Junso swore indifferently. He looked different now. His hair was much longer, and he had changed his line of work. It was night. There was a full moon in the sky. The silhouettes of two people stood opposite each other. One of them was breathing heavily. The white-haired guy in the orange shirt told the other that he was a good runner, further giving him the choice of either chasing the phone or getting punched in the face. The athlete told him to go far away. The white-haired man did not intend to wait long. He immediately flew at the athlete with fists and said that it turns out he preferred the second option. The athlete took the position of defense. He was extremely tense. The white-haired man hit him and he flew backwards. His defense didn't help him. His arm was hit painfully. It was shaking in pain. He was told in his earpiece to turn on his brains and get out. He was told to kick him off his leg and run in the opposite direction. The athlete replied that he understood. The athlete thought about the fact that it's only one punch after all. He took a breath and tuned out. He yelled and tried to kick the attacker's leg. However, the man raised his leg. He asked if he was serious. The white-haired man's leg ended up behind the athlete's back. Now the poor guy was flying on his back. The assailant was laughing loudly and smugly at him. Wasting no time, he punched the athlete right in the face. A lot of blood splattered. Around the athlete's face lay many of his own bloody teeth. The headphones were screaming disappointedly. The white-haired man raised his hand, which had a couple spots of someone else's blood on it. Now he was almost sitting on the athlete and looking for his phone. In the headphones some dude was saying he memorized his snout, calling him a bitch and saying he was going to find someone stronger and finish him off. Soon, the white-haired man pulled the earpiece out of the athlete's ear. He tossed it back and told the honored man to walk away. The guy in the earpiece was yelling and calling him a fucking rotter. Someone apologized. The white-haired man was a little surprised. He turned around and saw the delivery guy there. Squirrelflight asked his earpiece what he should do with him. He said what to think. It's just a delivery guy. Told him to fuck him up real quick and laughed. The white-haired man told him that if a civilian got involved, they could get a ticket. The guy in the headphones said that there were no cops around, saying it was a pain for them to waste time on such trivial matters. Kong Junso received a notification on his phone that a customer canceled his order and the reason was delayed delivery. Also, the customer decided to leave a review and a rating saying that they decided to cheat on the delivery and therefore half a star is pathetic. The head of the center had written to him about it, asking where the idiot was. Kong Junso exhaled and told the white-haired man that if he made monetary damages for the spoiled food, he would leave. The white-haired man stood up and calmly asked how much he needed, his hand going into his pants pocket. Kang Junso had already started to name the price, but something stopped him. And what stopped him was a kick to his own head. The white-haired man decided to hit him instead of making amends. Hyung's blue helmet flew upwards. But Kang Junso himself didn't fall down. The white-haired man laughed. Kang Junso menacingly asked him what he was doing. Squirrelflight asked if he was able to block a punch, saying it was pretty good. Kang Junso took a fighting stance. The white-haired man noticed this and smiled, saying that it meant that the delivery man had been practicing hand-to-hand combat. These words echoed through Kang Junso's head. He remembered that very last championship. His eyes widened greatly. He remembered the monster that had appeared in front of him back then. He once again felt like he was alone in a black space. Kang Junso was enveloped in fear, again. Now the white-haired man also looked like a zombie with red eyes and blood on his face. He repeated his question about playing with the punching bag. Kang Junso didn't like the fact that it had started again. Right now, it seemed to him that the white-haired monster was almost twice as big as himself. The monster swung at him and smiled widely. Kang Junso managed to block the blow of what he thought was a huge palm. In reality, it wasn't a monster attacking him at all, but a simple brigand. Kang Junso tried his best to convince himself that it was just a hallucination, which meant that the monster was not real. In the protagonist's eyes, the monster opened its mouth wide and roared right at him. At that moment it just looked terribly scary. Because of this, the poor traumatized guy once again fell to the ground and covered his head with his hands. The white-haired guy didn't realize what was happening at all, and Kang Junso was shaking on the ground. The earpiece told him to stop pulling the cat by the balls and finish with the delivery guy, and the white-haired guy, for some reason sadly, agreed with Hyungnim, which was the name of the person he was talking to through the earpiece. When Kang Junso did raise himself up on his elbows, it wasn't a man but a monster in front of him again, the guy shouting at him not to come any closer. He was just scared to death, telling himself that he should run. Suddenly, from the earpiece that was thrown out by the white-haired guy, someone shouted Kang Junso to put it on. The monster didn't attack, but it growled menacingly, blood and drool flowing from its terrifying mouth. Kang Junso turned around at the sound, and there he saw the earpiece. The earpiece was calling him over and over again, repeating that it said to put on the earpiece. Kang Junso took it. Then he was told that he was doing everything right and it was time to put it on. Kang Junso looked around, thinking he was being watched. The white-haired man started to walk towards him, noticing the strange movement. The monster asked Kang Junso if he wanted to try it too. From the earpiece shouted that the delivery man should be a man and show him, again repeatedly inserting the earpiece. Suddenly, the white-haired man wanted to kick Kang Junso from below. Luckily, Hyun noticed it. He had time to react and did a back somersault, thus pushing the white-haired man's leg away. This tensed up the attacker. Kang Junso finally followed the instructions and put on the earpiece. The earpiece said to take a stand now. Kang Junso obediently did so. The earpiece said that the main one he noticed he knew. The guy in the earpiece said that if he killed this thing he would buy him a new moped. The guy told the delivery guy to breathe deeply and follow his instructions. The white-haired guy rushed over to him again and asked if he had made up his mind again. He called the delivery guy a fucking puppy. The earpiece said that for starters, one should concentrate in one eye on his strikes and movements. This surprised Kang Junso very much. But it wasn't the strangeness of the technique that surprised him, it was the fact that a couple of years ago, his coach had told him the same thing. He remembered how in training, Song Jongnam had told him to focus in one eye on his opponent's punches and movements, how he said that the real game would only start after that. He remembered his teacher telling him that the steps for dodging and attacking were different. How he told the kid to learn to differentiate between the two. How he paid attention to something. To the coach's step, which was indeed different. And then the man's foot flew right into Kang Junso's face. However, by following the coach's instructions and watching his movements, Hyun managed to block the attack. But it wasn't as simple as he would have liked. The coach started to move on. His foot returned to its place, and instead, his fist started attacking him, much to Kang Junso's surprise. The man lifted him up by the chin and said that the fist should not be missed in doing so. The words about concentrating the movement with blows in one eye sounded in the protagonist's head once again. A huge monster was already rushing at him, once again opening its mouth. It was getting closer and closer, and as it got closer it became more massive. The white-haired man stretched one arm forward, probably intending to attack with it. The guy in the earpiece told Kang Junso that they were attacking from the right. Kang Junso was able to block the adjuster's attack, so he didn't seem so small against him anymore. The guy in the earpiece appreciated his blocking. The white-haired guy was even a little shocked. Kang Junso still had his hand in his own, and he was trying his best to move it at least a little towards his opponent. The white-haired guy wondered where this delivery boy got such strength from. Somehow, Kang Junso said they were missing. The man in the earpiece asked him what he had frozen. Kang Junso grabbed the white-haired man by the scruff of his neck and lifted him up. Then he explained that the symptoms were gone. The white-haired man shook in the air and asked what the cum vendor was carrying. He decided to engage his knee. It flew with all its force right into Hyun's solar plexus, the pain reverberating through his entire back. Kang Junso flew back a couple meters, grabbing his stomach and twisting. The white-haired man didn't feel any better, trying diligently to catch his breath after the strangulation he'd received. Hyunnim asked him if he was mocking him, telling him to get rid of the delivery guy as soon as possible. The white-haired man again said he understood. He was still holding his throat and squinting in pain. Soon he flew at his opponent again, engaging his knee again. The guy in the earpiece told Kang Junso to watch out. Kang Junso managed to dodge the attack. Now Hyun punched the white-haired man right in the face and he flew backward, splattering blood. Kang Junso wasted no time and ran closer to him. He once again struck his opponent right in the face. The white-haired man had to spit out another portion of blood. Squirrelflight's lips and nose were smashed. The guy in the earpiece was surprised that it was an overhand. He yelled that the delivery was really cool. The whitehead took hold of his nose and groaned in pain. Blood was running down his arm. The guy in the earpiece started saying, "Now. Time for the funeral." The white-haired gunner was furious. Kang Junso preferred not to waste any time and kicked his opponent in the jaw. The white-haired man had to spit out a bunch of blood again. The impact was so strong that the white-haired man was thrown back a couple of meters. Even Kang Junso was surprised by the strength of his attack. He tried to catch his breath and looked at his leg in surprise. The guy in the earpiece couldn't stand it and shouted that he was just mega good. The white-haired man was lying on the ground with his mouth open. His whole face was covered in blood, and only incomprehensible rustling sounds came from the earpiece. Kang Junso asked himself what had happened. Did the symptoms really disappear? He stared at his formerly champion hands in amazement. The guy in the headphone told the stranger to listen to him carefully, saying that he had a fucking great offer for him. However, Kang Junso didn't want to listen to anything. He hurriedly took off the earpiece. This surprised the guy on the other side. He asked if he could hear him. The earpiece flew into the sky and the guy kept yelling for the vendor to keep the earpiece on and not take it off. Kang Junso turned around and walked away, and the guy kept offering to talk to him and asking him to stop. Someone was watching the protagonist from the roof of a building that was not far away. It was a man in black. He had a black robe, gloves, cap and mask. On the cap was written P4. The stalker was deftly jumping from rooftop to rooftop, following Kang Junso. He had blonde hair. He was already sitting on a pole quite close to the delivery man. Then the man asked if he could just let him go. He didn't have headphones, but he had a chip around his neck through which he was addressing someone. Some guy on the other side asked why not. He said the civilian wasn't even injured. There were a lot of screens in front of him. Suddenly the article he came across surprised him. It was about the challenger Kang Junso, about the sudden calmness of the young boxer Kang Junso after losing his final MMA title fight. The stalker asked this guy if he knew who he was. The guy said no, just now making inquiries. However, he had one thing in mind. He cracked a smile. Asked if it wouldn't be fun if he joined in. Through the street cameras he watched Kang Junso walking. The stalker took off his cap. He looked at Kang Junso and said he didn't know if it would be fun. He said it all depended on whose character he would become. That person being the Rankers Law Enforcement Officer Police Number 4. There was a building with signs up ahead. The camera also showed the face of a battered white-haired guy. A system window popped up, saying that it was worth checking the status of the character, because the character will be deleted if it takes more than 6 weeks to recover. The man in the white suit hit the table hard. He shouted at the bastard to get up. This man is a player. His name is Hunter Thief. Rank 62nd place, coins 1787. Something seen on the screen greatly surprised the Hunter Thief. He yelled and asked where the creep had gone. He pressed some key on the keyboard. A window popped up asking if he wanted to access the view from another angle. The man cursed and shouted loudly that he did. He pressed enter again. Then a notification popped up stating that a view from CCTV cameras that were not associated with the player could not be granted. The Hunter Thief didn't realize what the hell it was. He started getting more and more notifications. They said the same thing, that the view from the CCTV cameras could not be provided because they were not associated with the player. The man cursed so loudly that it could be heard outside the building he was in. It was a dark night, and then lights were on in many windows. On the wooden table was a pile of trash, a basket and a notebook. It was far from all the trash in the room though. The whole room was dirty as it could be. There were even a couple of full black garbage bags and mountains of dirty dishes. Some blonde guy was sitting at a monitor. He was biting his nails and nervously asking for something. On his screen was an athlete. He too had received a notification that it was time to check his character, because he would be deleted if he took more than 6 weeks to recover. The player was reviewing his character's fight. He stopped the video and really asked for something. Asked for God's sake. He scrolled through the footage until the moment the white-haired man hit the delivery guy. The guy zoomed in on the box that fell off the moped and said he found it. Infectious delivery. This guy was also a player. His name, Internet Fighter. Rank was 81st place, and he had 1585 coins. It was a sunny morning. Kang Junso was sleeping sweetly in his bed. He rolled over. The sun was abundantly coming into his room. The guy was thinking about his symptoms. Once again he rolled over and asked himself had they really disappeared. He tried to go back to sleep. However, a moment later, he opened his eyes wide and straightened up. Kang Junsua fought back to his battle with the white-haired adjuster. How he had dodged his attack. How he had punched him in the jaw. And then again. And then again, but with his foot. Kang Junso abruptly assumed the same punching posture as he had then, only in bed. Then he said it was worth checking out. Up ahead was the building of the Blue Monster MMA Gym Club. Some wrestler in a blue helmet asked if he had had enough of life. He took a fighting stance and a guy in a red helmet stood in front of him. It was Kang Junso and he confidently told his opponent to attack. The opponent didn't wait long. He immediately flew at Kang Junso. The latter blocked the punch. However, it was still quite painful and he wrinkled his nose in pain. The guy in the blue helmet shouted that Kang Junso had probably come because he wanted to die. Swearing and saying that he hadn't heard a word before, he kicked Kang Junso's leg hard with his foot. Then he kicked Kang Junso hard in the head, but Hyung had time to put his gloved hand up, yelling that he hadn't been there and now he'd come and spar with him. Kang Junso was thrown into the iron net. He was breathing hard. He was already short of breath, even though the sparring had only recently started. The main character was asking himself when Taihani had gotten so strong. He turned around and once again saw a monster in front of him instead of a guy. The monster had red eyes and blood near his mouth as usual. He was much bigger than Kang Junso. The monster hissed at him to die. Kang Junso was stunned and the monster started to approach. Hyun closed his eyes. Then Taihani decided to waste no time. He punched his opponent's jaw with all his might. Yes, so hard that poor Kang Junso would be split upwards. He spat out a portion of blood. And then he fell to the floor. The guy was coming down the stairs. Daehan stood at the top. He called out to Kang Junso and asked him if he knew that the coach's wife was in the hospital because of a brain hemorrhage. The main character's face was all bruised and scratched, but he was surprised by the news. He stopped but didn't turn around, and Taehan told him that if he had even a shred of humanity left, he should visit, and then told him to forget it, because he didn't even have the right to do that. He was telling Hyun to leave. Kang Junso stood still, and Daehan told him not to come here again, because he wouldn't get off that easy next time. Kang Junso was clearly very upset. He walked sadly down the street. The managers of the infectious delivery service picked up the phone and asked how they could be of service. The caller greeted them and said he wanted to know the contact information of the young man who had made the delivery last night. The caller was the same internet warrior. He was biting his nails when he was told that they were sorry, but they couldn't give out personal information of their employees. The guy replied that the issue was that CCTV caught their employee hitting a passerby and leaving the scene. He explained that the food box had "contagious delivery" written on it in big letters. The guy asked if it might be faster if he uploaded the video to YouTube. He smiled sneakily. Then the manager asked him to wait 1 second. On the guy's monitor was a system notification that there were 38 hours, 25 minutes and 6 seconds left until the end of the character re-registration. The manager explained that the moped number was 52 to 12XX. The guy typed that number on the keypad. An image of a poster with Kang Junso and Shin Do-hyun before the middleweight championship on March 10, 2020 popped up on his screen. The guy poked his finger at the picture of Kang Jinseo. He said that there was no way he thought a simple reach would turn out to be such a big fish, but he was clearly pleased. A girl and a man were sitting in an office. The man shouted and asked, "What do you mean a man was run over?" The girl said that yes, it was, and she had to give the caller the moped's license plate number. The man replied that they had arrived, called. He was holding his head. Then the man did pull himself together and said that to begin with. His bald head seemed to divinely glow. Suddenly some group of people walked into their office. One of the men loudly asked who was the boss here. This guy looked strong and formidable. The bald man immediately hit his head down and the girl turned around scared. One of the group of people was that white-suited player. He was not in a good mood and sternly glanced in their direction. He saw the glowing head that was hiding behind the monitor. A group of people headed towards them. Among them was also a large and pumped-up guy. He asked one of the employees what he was hatching. He said he was poking his eyes out now. The bald boss was trembling with fear. He wondered what was going on, if it was about the delivery man they had come to investigate. A camera shot was thrown on his desk that showed Kang Junso in his infectious delivery uniform. The man in the white suit wasn't verbose. He simply asked for his name, contacts and address. It wasn't even a request, more like an order, and so he told the man he had 10 seconds. Kang Junso was walking down the street between the houses. He was extremely sad, asking himself what was the problem. He still saw the monster in the enemy and it made him terribly sad. The protagonist immediately remembered the face of the first monster he saw. He remained silent for a moment. Then he clenched his teeth and grabbed his jaw. He opened it wide, apparently in pain, and said that the bastard had grown up. A red motorcycle stopped in front of him. The guy on it asked if Kang Junso lived here, much to Hyun's surprise. Soon Kang Junso was climbing the stairs to the top, a small box in his hands, asking himself who the package was from. Inside was an earpiece and something else. His phone rang. Kang Junso picked up the phone. The person on the other side didn't introduce himself, but asked if he had opened the box. This surprised the protagonist even more. He asked who it was. From there the guy asked if he had already forgotten him. Then Kang Junso remembered that it was the same voice as yesterday. The guy said he was right, and then told him to put on an earpiece with lenses. An expensive black car pulled up to Kang Junso's house. People got out and called out to Kang Junso. The main character again didn't realize what was going on. A man in a white suit came out of the car, smiled sneakily and told Kang to play a game with him. Hyun turned around and a couple of people were already coming up to him. They all went up to the roof where Kang Junso was standing. The guy on the phone asked if he was being ignored again. Kang Junso asked what they needed. A man in a white suit also came up to them. He replied that it was a stupid question and obviously they need dough. He explained that he was -9 mil for a character that was deleted because of Kang Junso, as well as 100 mil for re-registration. Kang Junso asked what kind of character. Then the guy on the phone realized what was going on. He yelled for Hyun not to talk to them. Suddenly, the foot of the man in white came up. It ended up right in front of Kang Junso's mouth. The man smiled and said that Kang Junso himself had done this yesterday and removed his character. He lowered his foot and stepped back a little. Then he did the math and said that it adds up to a total of 3. That's what he came for. Kang Junso replied that if he was talking about yesterday, let him file a police report. The man in white laughed and said that they could solve it without the cops. He put his hand on the protagonist's shoulder. On his hand was an expensive gold ring. The man moved closer and told Kang Junso to listen to him carefully, saying he was only explaining once. He said that there was a game called Rancor. However, it was not fun for everyone but only for those with dough in their pocket, saying that in order for a player to take part in the game, they had to hire a character. Kang Junso was astonished. He thought it was all some nonsense. He asked himself what this man was talking about. Then the man smiled widely and said, jumping to the conclusion, he wanted this guy to be his character. This stunned Kang Junso even more, and the man started digging through his pocket. He handed him the exact same earpiece and lenses as the ones in the box. The man said that after that, a game would begin where the delivery man was the character and he was the player. Kang Junso took the phone away from his ear. The guy yelled from there not to take anything from him. The man in the white suit noticed this and asked who was hanging on his phone. Kang Junso said he had no idea what the gimmick was. However, he said that it was time for the man to stop, because he might run out of patience. Kang Junso's eyes were burning. He was serious. The man smiled widely in response. He agreed and said that in addition, it would be a good idea to test his skills again. He turned to the 4 other people that accompanied him, calling them characters and telling them to help the guy make up his mind. The 4 of them immediately rushed to attack Kang Junso. This surprised him greatly. Kang Junso was greatly surprised to see 4 characters flying at him at once. Among them was a guy with long black hair. He ran up to Kang Junso first. In a moment, his foot was right in front of the protagonist's face, about to deliver the first blow. Kang Junso managed to set up a block, covering his face with his fists. He let out a loud shriek. There was a fierce battle going on. The attack from the characters of the man in the white suit. They were flying at Kang Junso from all sides. Soon, the fist of a large pumped-up man, the only one who wasn't in a formal suit, flew right into Hyun's nose. Kang Junso had already landed on the yellow table that was originally nearby. He continued to be attacked while the man in the white suit calmly watched the whole thing. Kang Junso sat on the table holding his face, the lenses and earpiece falling out of the box. The lenses began to glow. After a while, Hyun was lying on the floor, covering his head with his hands while the 4 characters kicked him. The main character was already bleeding. He wasn't in a panic, but he wasn't happy about such a beating either. All of this was also displayed on the screen. Someone who was watching this shouted that these attacks were morons. He wondered how 4-on-1 was possible. He yelled at Kang Junso to get up soon, telling him to do something. The guy whined and dialed 112. His finger was already over the call button. He slowed down, though, because he realized that if he called the cops himself, he'd get a ticket too. The guy preferred not to do that. He put the phone down. He was not happy with the outcome of events. The 4 stood calmly over Kang Junso, who was just sprawled out on the floor. His temple and mouth were bleeding. He raised his head and once again saw not people but monsters in front of him, all of them staring at him intimidatingly, their shirts and faces bloody, their eyes burning red as usual. The man in the white suit ordered the characters to lift up Kang Junso. 2 of them immediately lifted the guy by the scruff of his neck and set him on his feet. The man in white started to walk towards them. He reprimanded. He walked over to Kang Junso and lifted his face to his face by his hair. Even though he was smiling then, now he was cursing and yelling at him for what it was. The delivery man was boxing. He asked Kang Junso if he was really defective. Kang didn't answer and then the man just ordered him to talk, calling him a scumbag. Kang Junso looked up at him, but he saw a monster in him too. This again greatly frightened the poor former boxer. He screamed loudly and broke free from the man's grasp. However, this was to no avail. The man kicked up his legs and threw him down by his head. Kong Junso fell painfully on his side. The man asked if he was completely off his rocker. Why yell like that? And then he gave Kong Junso a terribly judgmental look. Then he turned to his 4 characters and told them to search his house for money, so they immediately understood and went to look for it. The man in the white suit stepped back and lit a cigarette. He sat down on the other side of the yellow table and exhaled heavily, while Kong Junso remained lying on the ground. His phone was silent, and so was he. Then the guy on the phone asked if Kong Junso could hear him, and the protagonist lay there silently looking at the phone. However, a little while later, he asked the phone who they were. The stranger on the line was glad that Kong was alive, saying that he had seen through his lenses how they had beaten him. The man in the white suit, meanwhile, was yelling at some Sanchal to find him a normal character, saying he was going to keep going, because he'd already spent so much money on this shit. Suddenly, Kong Junso got up and asked the guy on the line what the hell was going on, asking if they had completely lost their minds. The man in white was furious. The blonde guy who was on the line with Kong Junso said that he had already said that they were playing, said that both he and the man in the white suit were looking for a new character, said that there were a lot of people who might have their eyes on boxers. Also added that, by the way, Kong Junso was okay yesterday, cool punching, cool dodging. He became more serious and asked what was the problem today. Kong Junso didn't answer at first. He turned around. There were lenses in a box nearby. They were glowing brightly. He remembered his battle with the white-haired guy yesterday. How the same guy on the line had guided him, telling him to watch out. How he deftly dodged the attacks. How he used his jab to attack the fixer. How he punched him in the jaw. How the guy in the earpiece realized it was an overhand and told him he was really cool. How the white-haired guy's nose was bleeding. And the guy in the earpiece said it was time for the funeral. The scared look on the whitehead's face. Then a powerful kick to the jaw. How he himself was amazed at his former abilities. How he was told he was mega good. Then Kong Junso asked the guy on the line, was it this thing? He was talking about the lenses and the earpiece he had sent him. Kong looked at them carefully while in thought. Not thinking too long, he grabbed the devices. Meanwhile, the 4 characters were ransacking his house. They went through every corner of his apartment. One got exhausted and asked if there was anything. Another, the long-haired one, said nothing at all. The third stopped and said that the boss was about to compost his brains again. Just at that moment, a man in white came inside. His silhouette in the doorway looked extremely intimidating. The guys said that they'd searched the whole apartment. He'd found nothing. Something was wrong with Hyungnam. Suddenly, he fell face down. The 4 of them, not realizing what exactly had happened, rushed towards him. Kong Junso appeared behind him, wiping the blood from his hands. He had a lens over his eyes and an earpiece in his ear. The long-haired character flew first. He fell painfully to the floor. The other one was badly beaten. He was lying immobile on the parquet in the main character's apartment. The other 2 were still standing upright. They lunged at Kong Junso, screaming that he was a fucking asshole. The guy in the earpiece told Kong Junso that the big guy's fists were faster. The protagonist immediately dodged 2 of the guy's attacks. He caught the leg of the second one with his hands and held it firmly against him. Then he fell the character to the floor. He landed painfully on the carpet and blood flew around. Kong Junso was still holding him. The guy in the earpiece told Kong to drop one first, which the main character did. He started hammering the guy with one hand. Then he stood up. The big guy was standing behind him with his back to him. He was terribly stunned. He probably didn't expect something like this from the guy he just beat up. Kong Junso turned around to him, instilling fear. It really scared the big guy. He didn't look so arrogant and confident anymore. Then the guy in the earpiece told him to look at the thickness of his head, told him that fists would not do the job. He suggested he use a feint and then a kick. Kong Junso assumed a boxer's fighting stance. He threw himself at the big man. In the moment, his foot flew right into the back of the big guy's head. The impact was so strong that the big guy fell to the floor with a thud. Kong Junso exhaled. He looked down at the characters he had defeated from above. There was a blue sky above. The trees were blooming, they were full of green leaves. The guy in his earpiece asked if he saw his opponents as monsters. Kang Junso replied that he did, but he didn't know the exact reason why. But it's a thing that sometimes happens suddenly during the battle. Kang was sitting on a bench in front of a body of water. The guy in the earpiece said that if he feels better when he hears his voice, then it's healing, and he laughed. Then he asked why he shouldn't try it then. He said it would help him recover his psyche and get money. The money interested Kang Junso more and he asked about it. Then the blonde player started his tale. He said that there were 100 players in the game in total. Said that each of them threw 200 million won to create their profile. And right after that, character recruitment is underway. He said that when the total of 20 billion won is collected from all players, the characters begin to go on various quests. He said that whoever is the last day of this year would end up in 5th place would earn 1 billion, 4th place would earn 2 billion, and 3rd place would earn 3 billion. This was all very surprising to Kang Junso, and the guy kept going on, saying that 2nd place would earn 4 billion, and 1st place would earn as much as 10 billion won. Kang Junso recalled Taihan's words that the coach's wife had gone blind due to a brain hemorrhage. He was very heartbroken and saddened by this news. The player said he was thinking of splitting the award somewhere in the ratio of 7-3. Kang Junso clenched his fist. He agreed, but offered to make one more check before doing so. In front of him was the blue monster gym once again. Kang Junso was already fighting someone, and the guy in the earpiece was counting and saying that everything was fine. Kang Junso was fighting Taehong. The guy in the earpiece was giving him instructions. First hook, then body. And at the end, he yelled out a finish off, which means get it done, his gloved hand resting on the blue ring. Kang Junso's hand was right in front of Taihan's chin, wearing a blue helmet. However, Kang Junso didn't move, and so the guy in the earpiece asked why he stopped. Taehan closed his eyes and asked in a trembling voice if Hyun had gotten better. Kang Junso exhaled a breath and said not yet. He took off his red helmet, smiled and held out his hand to Taehyun and told him to wait a bit, because he would be back soon. Up ahead was the hospital where the coach's life could not be saved. There were lights on in many of the windows. A red sign was burning on the wall that said it was an emergency center. In the room, a male player was sitting on a bed, with 4 of his characters standing beside him. The man was furious. He was yelling for them to find him the freak immediately. One of the guys was badly hurt. His arm was broken. He asked who he meant. The man yelled that past internet fighter character, that gym rat. The guy gently asked how they would know where they were. The man picked up a stick. He waved it around as hard as he could, trying to beat the characters and yelling that they were stupid idiots. He asked where else the type who got his jaw crushed could be. He ordered them to check all the nearest hospitals. Morning came. The sun was shining clear. Someone was looking up at the hood in the ceiling of the hospital room and sighed sadly. It was an athlete beaten up by a white-haired guy, asking himself why the hell he'd even gotten into this in the first place. 3 months ago, he'd been running, playing sports. He wondered if coming in first place could really get you 10 billion, even though he had good physical fitness. He was already getting a lot of puffiness. The internet fighter cheerfully replied that yes, besides, he would get half an athlete. He watched the guy from the monitors and asked why his lungs were so weak. The guy, panting, grudgingly replied that he was the worst coach ever. The guy slammed his gloved fists hard against the punching bag. He was already in the gym. His phone was on a tripod nearby. The internet fighter was watching this. He was not at all happy with the picture. He told the athlete that the punch should be weighty, asked if he was sure he was practicing. He replied that he said that he had studied hand-to-hand strikes himself. He said that in that case, let him come and show him how to do it, if he was so smart. And the internet fighter replied that he was a coach even then. The athlete asked where he would find a man who immediately became a coach. The guy was offended by this and said that there are also such people, and the athlete kept saying that the player himself does not know how to do anything, and still noodles on the ears. The internet fighter did not let him finish. He hit the table hard and told him to shut up and hit again. The athlete gathered himself and clenched his teeth hard. After that, he hit the punching bag with all his might. There was some kind of bag on the blanket. The athlete was lying on the bed and saw it. He, in the aftermath of being badly beaten, especially in the face, asked unintelligibly what it was. A guy in a black sweatshirt, cap, mask and glasses, probably an internet fighter, stood next to him. He said it was money for the hospital, saying that the athlete had done a good job and that he would give him the care allowance later. The athlete was very moved by this and tears came out on his face. He took the guy's hand and whined his name, Jun. Jun immediately got out and started to walk away, telling him to stop doing that because it was cringe, saying they would see each other when he got out. Jun waved goodbye to him. The athlete was simply fascinated by his mentor. Then he decided that he had gotten into this for a reason, tears of pride running down his cheeks. Jun got into an orange cab. As soon as the car drove off, a black darling parked in its place. Four characters of a man in a white suit got out of there. The big guy asked another guy what if he wasn't here. The guy told him to shut up, saying they just had to find him. The rooftops of high-rise buildings came into view. In one of them, Jun was sitting in his room. He stared at the monitor in amazement, not understanding anything. There was a message from the moderator of the game. It was written that as a result of monitoring noticed a violation of the rules, the hunter thief almost defeated the internet fighter, but then suddenly got into a fight with a civilian. It was found out that the injury to the character of the hunter thief is tantamount to removal, and therefore the fight is cancelled. Since the fight is cancelled, the next penalty is imposed. Then there was a button confirm and cancel. The next pop-up window showed the player's data. The 62nd ranked hunting thief would be fined 500 coins and the 81st ranked internet fighter would be fined the same amount. And it also said that this message would be sent to both players, and once confirmed, the coins would be automatically deducted. Jun shuddered. It was 500 coins. He bit his nails and shouted that it was 50 million won. The next window said there were 14 hours 6 minutes and 15 seconds left until the close of re-registration. Poor Jun put his hand to the keyboard. After a bit of thought, he did confirm the penalty. The download began. And then the points were written off. Jun leaned back in his chair and shouted loudly. A shopping mall loomed ahead. Sitting at a table in a cafe was Kong Junso. Jun asked him if he had gone to the place he told him to go, if he had fixed his lenses. Kong said yes, they were fixed. Jun said he should hurry up and register his character, because there was no time, saying that there were only losses because of Junso. Kong Junso replied that he only said that he was only checking, not that he agreed to participate. He said that he also said that hand-to-hand combat doesn't happen often. Jun stammered and said that it was just because he valued his character. He said that if Kong Junso wanted to, he could hunt and fight every day. Kong Junso didn't understand the meaning of the last two words and asked the guy to explain to him what it meant. The guy said that if he registered he would explain the rules to him. Kong started twirling the earpiece on his finger. He said he was about to throw the thing somewhere. Then Jun had to be told. He said that in the time left over from quests you could have a hunt or a battle. He said a hunt is when a player with your level attacks a player with a lower level. Battle is when a low-level player challenges a high-level player. Said you can give up battle, but you can't give up hunting. If you win, the winner takes all of your opponent's coins and his place in the rankings changes. He asked Kong Junso loudly and angrily, shouting, if he was satisfied now. Kong Junso said that means then that day. Jun replied that yes, he was being hunted. The protagonist said that since the guy in the earpiece was ranked 81st out of 100 people, he was not a good player. Jun hurriedly replied that he had just met the wrong character, saying that if Kong Junso was so confident, let him prove his skills. Jun was already fed up with Kong. In the end, Kong Junso agreed to give it a try. Suddenly, his phone began to glow. There was a black screen and a sign that said to press here. Kong Junso pressed and the download started. After downloading, a window popped up that told him to do a retinal scan. Kong Junso brought the phone closer to his eyes. Next was to do a fingerprint scan. The protagonist placed his finger in the designated spot. What Kong Junso saw on the screen next? really surprised Kang Junso. There was an old photo of him from his boxing days, as well as his date at Kang Junso, 25 years old, South Korea. Occupation, former boxer. Special fact, retired from the sport 2 years ago due to panic disorder. Study results, character registration possible. Kang Junso's data was on Jun's monitors too, along with a scale of his speed, technique, balance, and strength. A window popped up asking if the player wanted to pay 1,000 coins to register a new character. He had 1,085 coins in his account, and there were only 10 hours left until the end of re-registration. Jun decided to count the 200 million it took to create the account as logged money, but it took him 3 months to collect 1,585 coins. In fact, Jun was very nervous and cursed Kang Junso for the fine of 500 and the re-registration of 1,000. He reread the notice again. And then still clicked confirm. Downloading again. And then the payment went through. A notification came up that the character registration was over. Jun was told it was time to take the training to test his skills. Enter his character's current location and hit confirm, and then the random quest would begin. Poor Jun was crying about losing all his earnings. He told Kang Junso that the training was next. He asked if he was ready. It seemed like the player was fuming with anger and sadness. Kang asked what there was to prepare. He said Jun told him it was a simple test. Jun replied that if he underestimated the game like that, he would regret it. Jun started looking for something on the computer. As the first quest, he was given hand-to-hand combat. And also escape. In the quest escape 5 seconds after the start of the person will be accused of stealing. The character has to run towards the Kwangwoman. Then, unexpectedly for the protagonist, Jun shouted to him to immediately run out to the big road. Kang Junso asked why. Jun didn't answer but told him to move faster. The countdown began. Kang slowly got up and stretched, then asked where he should run to. The guy in the earpiece said to the Sunsen statue in Gwangwoman Square. Kang Junso asked where it was. Jun replied that the direction would be Giano Samjie, shouting for him to turn around and gas. This was starting to stress the protagonist out. He started to wonder what it was, but before he could finish speaking, the player interrupted him, telling him to look at the message. There were 2 seconds left before the quest started. When Kang did pay attention to the phone, the quest began. Some office worker turned to the 2 police officers, pointing his finger at Kang Junso. Then the 3 began to approach him. One of the law enforcement officers asked the young man to wait. Kang Junso didn't realize what was happening. He was surprised. Now he saw that the message said that he was suspected of street theft. It told him to get to the statue of Lee Sunsin, which is located in Gwangwoman Square, and touch it with his hand. The next message told him what would happen if he was caught by the police. The first was to cancel the character registration, and the second was to block the communication between the player and the character. This stunned Kang Junso even more. The police didn't like his reaction either. They nodded to each other. Then they tore towards him, yelling at him not to move. Kang Junso was terrified. The internet fighter was still in 81st place, but he only had 85 coins in his account. The police officers were yelling at the entire street for him not to move. Kang Junso finally started to run away. The policeman chased after him and kept ordering him to stop. Kang Junso asked the player if it was his tricks. Jun replied to the dude that he already said it was training. The protagonist yelled at him that he was talking about a test. Jun replied that it was the test. Passers-by turned around in surprise at the chase. Eventually, the internet fighter told his newfound character to just run. There was a sign on a pole that showed to Chano Samjie to the right. There was a huge crowd on the street. Kang Junso kept having to apologize to them while making his way through all that pile of people. Kang ran so fast and nimble that some people didn't even have time to notice who was addressing them. There was a crosswalk ahead, and Kang Junso kept rushing forward. He had long since run out of breath, but there was no way for him to stop. Then the protagonist noticed that there was a red light on the traffic light. He braked sharply. Suddenly, a police car flew out from behind the corner, which was terrible news for Kang Junso. It was already very close to the protagonist. He was confused and didn't know what he should do now. At the same time, 2 policemen were also approaching from behind. They once again shouted at the guy to stand still. Kang Junso was angry. He asked the player what the hell this was all about, and the player told him not to drag his feet and run. June asked him to tell him tomorrow's news, said that the headline would be "Suddenly Disappeared Boxing Star Caught Pickpocketing," shouted that financial difficulties or mental illness would be a pompous headline. Kang Junso did not really like this kind of thing either. He was very tense and struggled to find a solution. Finally, the green light came. Kang Junso rushed forward. One of the cars hadn't even slowed down yet, and he was already flying right under its wheels. Kang Junso turned to the driver, who was screaming loudly in fear and surprise. The protagonist put his hands on the orange hood. Then he deftly jumped over the car. At first he fell on his shoulder, but then he got up with ease. The people on the other side of the crosswalk looked at him mesmerized. It was a bit of a pain, so as not to get undue attention, he fixed his cap so that his face could not be seen. He ran on. The policeman also ran through the pedestrian crossing. Kang Junso asked the player what now. June was looking at the screen. He had a view not only from the character's eyes. He saw the police also running out from the other corner. June was well aware that at this rate he would be tied up. He had an idea of some sort. That idea was the underground shopping center on Chano Samjie. He decided that Kang Junso should run there. He told the guy to go down to the subway that was in front of him. Kang Junso deftly jumped over the fence between the downhill slope and the road. The police officers had no such physical powers. They stopped at the fence and yelled to the guy in the gray hoodie, Kang Junso, to stop immediately. Kang Junso didn't listen to them. He was already down the stairs. He asks the guy in the earpiece where he should go next. June looked at him through the mall cameras. He told him to the opposite exit upstairs. Kang Junso turned around and there, behind him, the cops were already approaching him and yelling at him not to move. The protagonist rushed towards the opposite exit. June was terribly nervous. He thought that since he was going to get caught anyway, there should at least be an excuse. He noticed that there was a store ahead. The sign said that headphones were cheaper than shoes, and it was a sensation. June told Kang Junso to take an earphone from the store on his right. Kang Junso didn't understand and asked again. June shouted that that's the way to go and let him take it when they say. Kang Junso stalled without further question. He grabbed the headphones. The guy wanted to ask the salesman if he could pay. He froze and June didn't understand why he did that. Then Kang Junso explained that the owner wasn't there and therefore he couldn't. June didn't let him finish. He cursed him and told him to just run, saying he could pay later. Kang Junso looked at the price tag on the package. There was 5,000 won. He started going through his pockets. June started to get even more worried, yelling to run for heaven's sake. Some man turned his attention to Kang Junso, who was already running away. He wondered what he was going to do. Then he saw 2 policemen running after the guy. But what surprised him even more was the 5,001 that was on his cash register. Ahead of him was a pole that said Cheonggak subway exit. Kang Junso ran up the stairs to the top and finally went outside. He was exhausted and now he was suffering from severe shortness of breath. There was a road ahead and on the other side there were 3 more police officers. One of them pointed a finger at Kang Junso and said there he was. June said that now the guy should run as fast as he could to Cheonggak station. Kang Junso furrowed his brows and gathered all his courage into a fist. He puffed up his cheeks and slowly exhaled. Afterward, he rushed to his destination at a speed he had never contacted before. The cops were also very tired of chasing after him. They shouted at the top of their voices for the road to stop. Kang Junso again had to apologize to the entire crowd of passers-by. He asked them to let him pass. There was a signpost ahead. It said Cheonggak Station on the left. Some man in camouflage was running away from another man in a gray business suit. The man who was running away was out of breath. He turned around to check on the man who was chasing him. The man in camouflage was wearing an earpiece. The man in the gray suit didn't have an earpiece but had a blue chip around his neck. From there, he was told there was a big road coming up, told they couldn't be hunted, asked if he wanted a raise. The man said he would catch him sooner. He pushed himself hard off the ground. Now he was quite close to the guy in camouflage. The latter was in great suspense. Suddenly, someone appeared between them. This greatly surprised the man in the suit. That someone was Kong Junso. The man in the gray suit grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and lifted him high. The protagonist was surprised. However, he quickly reacted. Kong grabbed the man's arm. With the other, he rested it on his chest. This helped him get out of the man's grip. They were now facing each other in identical positions. Kong Junso's eyes were wide open, and he was still breathing heavily and loudly as well. The man also had an unforgettable expression on his face. Absolutely all the passers-by were staring at them. The man in the suit pulled himself together and asked the stranger who he was. Up ahead was a beautiful villa that was surrounded by greenery. Inside, a slender girl was practicing yoga and watching a large screen in parallel. On the screen was Kong Junso's face, and the player's data was 81st ranked internet fighter. She said, "Look, 81st ranked." She said, "In that case, instead of a pheasant, we should at least catch a chicken." This girl is the player descended from Heaven Queen. Her rank is rank 50, and there were 3,988 coins. She poked the screen right at Kong Junso's face. Then a message popped up saying that it was impossible to open a hunt, because the character was in the process of training. The girl was not happy about it, so she asked what the hell was going on. A squad of policemen was already rushing towards them. They shouted to Junso not to move a muscle. Jun was worried. He told the guy in a trembling voice that it was also a player, saying that he was on the 50th place and Kong Junso it's time to tick from there. This surprised the protagonist. He apologized to the man in the suit and quickly ran away. The man turned around and asked his player if he could catch up with him. The girl said no, because he was a nub, said he couldn't be hunted, but told him to memorize his face so he could eat him sometime. Jun swore and said they almost got into trouble. Kong Junso asked him what he meant. He said he'd explain later and told him to get his headphones. Kong Junso had them in his hands. They were running through some stadium and a policeman yelled at him to stand. The protagonist was already terribly out of breath. A police car showed up ahead again. Jun watched the whole thing from above. He had a view of the whole alley. It turned out that the police car was not one but three. He also saw that Kong Junso was heading towards a hillock, followed by a squad of 5 policemen. This elevation was the statue, the destination. Jun was so nervous that he jerked up from his seat and the chair fell to the floor with a clatter. He shouted for Kong Junso to touch the statue. The protagonist's hand was already quite close. Jun was watching from the monitor. His hand was a couple of centimeters away from the wall. But the police officers weren't lagging behind either. The moment was terribly tense. However, Kong Junso still managed to touch the wall, albeit with his fingertips. Then one of the policemen put his arm around his waist and they all fell on top of each other. The cop sat on Kong Junso and yelled that he told him to stop. He pulled the hood off the guy. There he saw Kong Junso's surprised face, the headphones in his ears and the loud music that was coming from there. Kong Junso smiled, pulled one earphone out of his ear, and asked what the problem was, if he couldn't play sports anymore. The cop that was sitting on top of him ignored him. He turned around. He took Kong Junso by the scruff of the neck and yelled that here he is. Out of the police car came the man that had earlier alerted the police to the theft. He was terribly embarrassed, but said they had caught the wrong guy. Some of the police were misunderstanding, some were furious. Jun watched all of this from his monitor. He exhaled with the words that it was close. He finally relaxed and offered to look at the test results. On the screen was a notice that the task had been completed successfully in 10 minutes and 47 seconds. It even said that they had set a new record in the quest, called the run. Then there was a message saying that the training was completed, and the character's ability scale, all the attributes were at their highest, and the technique and speed were at the limit of their reach. Jun was so shocked that he had to cover his mouth with his hand. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door and said that a delivery had arrived. From behind the door said it was the delivery man. Jun, putting on his mask, goggles and cap, said to leave it at the door. Here they are, a man stressing out. He came to the front door and asked to wait 1 second. Jun slowly opened the door. The delivery man was someone tall. June immediately noticed there was more than one person there and was very surprised. When he opened the door, he came to a horror. It was all because one of the characters of the man in white hung on him. He greeted the internet fighter. He wore a sinister smile and called the guy a little bitch, and the truth is the character was much bigger and taller than the player. Evening came. The police station was ahead. Citizen Ken was finally allowed to go. Kang Junso held the earpiece in his hand and exhaled relaxedly. June sat in front of the monitor. He paid attention to something. There was a street on his screen, he said, looking. He walked out. Kang Junso put on his earpiece and heard the player asking if everything was okay. Kang replied that if he had known from the beginning what the fuck was in store for him. June interrupted him saying 3 million won, and Kang Junso didn't understand anything. June explained that it was a reward for a new record in the quest run. Then Kang Junso saw that he had received a money order from Jong Jun in the amount of 3 million won. June was telling him that if he converted 100 game coins into real money, it would be 10 million won. He said that Kang Junso's share was 3 million won. Kang Junso was silent and June asked, "So what's the big deal?" Then he said he spent 5,000 won of his own money. June asked what about it and told him to ask him for more money for the subway. He said he was right and asked him for it too. Said he was fired from his part-time job so he was broke. June told his buddy to go home and rest. Kang Junso didn't like that and the tone called his player a tosser. He was finally home. Kang had changed his clothes and had already had time to work out on the rooftop simulator. Now, he was reading something about the character's regulations on his phone. It wrote about the character not having access to the account and coins, the character being deleted if inactive for 6 weeks, and so on. Kang Junso said he is not a character, but a puppet. In a word, said he would go to the shower. The main character went home. However, he left his phone outside on the simulator. It lit up. It turned out that he had gotten a call from a creep. There was some construction going on. June was there. Someone had just punched him hard in the jaw so blood was coming out of his mouth. It was the man in white himself, only now he was dressed a little differently. 3 of his characters were watching the beating and the 4th was calling someone. June himself was tied up and tied to a chair. The one on the phone told Hyungnim that he was picking up. Hyungnim shouted he would be called until he picked up. He shouted that his characters were idiots. The character quietly replied that he was listening. June said they were breaking the rules and if the moderator found out. The man yelled that if he found out. He looked like a real psycho, that he was towering over poor June. He said that when they used to come to game companies, they gave rare items and helped with the account. But this asshole, even the company is ghostly. He said that in this case, they will decide everything in real life. The man took June by the chin, then threw him to the floor. He yelled to his characters to log into the sucker's account and check how much money he had in his account. June's head hit the tile painfully. Kang Junso's house was visible up ahead. He had gone outside wearing only a towel. Now he was looking at his phone and wondering who was calling at this hour. Then he saw that it was a Sting contact. He picked up the phone and without any greetings asked what he wanted, saying he told him himself to rest. The wrong voice told Kang Junso that he sees they have managed to become friends during this time. The protagonist was surprised. He was told to transfer the call to video. Kang pressed the video button. There he saw a man in white and a blonde kid, June. The man told him to say hello to his unlikely player. Kang Junso was silent. He looked at the poor kid and wondered if this was the creep. The man said that judging from Kang Junso's stupor, they had never met face to face, and he said he had to pay up. So let Kang come here. The guy asked why he would do that. The guy asked if that was it, saying that he should remember to watch the news tomorrow, because as far as he knew, that puppy didn't even have a family. Shouting that that's why he would have to organize the funeral. The man grabbed the poor boy hard by the hair. The man was hysterical, begging Kang for help. Now that face of Kang Junso was not so heartless. The protagonist received an address Sadan District 446XX, a construction site. He exhaled unhappily. Then abruptly stopped and looked at the phone. It said that the character couldn't participate in quests without the player's consent, or battles or hunts and so on. A siren button appeared on his screen. There was a caption at the top saying that the character could not contact the moderator, but in case of an emergency had the right to press the summon button. Kang Junso pressed it. Next, he was asked to describe the reasons for the summoning. There were multi-story buildings up ahead, and someone inside one of them was shouting loudly. It was a tattooed guy in a white t-shirt, with many screens in front of him watching someone's fight and yelling for one of the guys fighting to knee the other guy. The second guy was lying on the ground covered in blood after being hit with his knee. The guy in tattoos was cheerfully shouting that the removal was completed and a winnings of 100 million won was received. Suddenly, his joy was interrupted by an alarm on the screen. He blurted out and wondered if it was a denunciation from a character. Next, he opened the notification from the character. It said his name was Kang Junso and he is an internet fighter character, saying he didn't know if he was doing the right thing. The guy burst out laughing. He literally burst out laughing and shouted that he was a jerk, but you couldn't tell. He started to read further. It said that Ken was called by the hunter thief via video link and he saw his player being beaten and threatened. They were at a construction site in the area of Soden for 48XX. Then the guy was not so funny and fun. He asked himself whether the player had been kidnapped. The guy was furious about these fucking gangsters. This guy is the moderator of the game. He is also called the master. Someone was already in the parking lot and was heading to his vehicle. It was the same blonde-haired person, a girl. She was his character. The moderator told her to conduct a seizure of the hunter-thief account that's on 62 place. He called her P4. P4 said she understood everything. She got on her bike and rushed outside. Kang Junso was already in the Soden neighborhood and was looking at the construction site. He looked up and thought that since the message had been received, he should just wait. He had the poor kid, Jong Jun, in his mind, the way he was sobbing and begging for help. Then he exhaled and thought about how he felt sorry for him. The main character started to climb the stairs upstairs, very close by. The floor above were the characters and the hunting thief and the internet fighter. Kang Junso stepped onto the tiles. All four characters and the man in white himself looked at him. Kang Junso thought about hearing the voice. He thought that the player of his would understand it. He started to walk closer. Suddenly, a piece of wood flew. It was thrown with great force, but fortunately, Kang Junso managed to dodge it. The wood hit the iron and sparks flew. The man laughed and clapped his hands, shouting that he told him he would dodge. Some massive stranger with a ponytail asked if he had thrown too loudly. He had a nasty look on his face. He approached and started attacking Kang Junso, but the latter dodged his blows time after time. Then the stranger accelerated and raised his foot. It flew into Kang Junso's face, but the protagonist managed to block the kick. He flew far away. Kang Junso sat against the wall and recovered. While the man laughed and told his new character that it looked like he was practicing hard, the stranger replied that such a thing was just a couple of trifles to him. Then he asked the hunting thief if he would make him his character like he promised. The man told him to squash the bug first and then they would talk about it. Kang Junso and Young Jun looked at each other. Kang tapped on his earpiece demonstratively. Jun just remembered that. He shouted loudly for Kang to hold his defenses and focus. Kang Junso smiled. The stranger was already flying at him, asking how he could swat him. Kang Junso thought to himself, seeing that he had experience in the sport. He once again dodged his attack. The stranger was surprised. The next arm flew after that. Jun shouted movements wider, telling his character not to let the stranger corner him. Kang Junso dodged again, but this time, also hit the stranger hard in the jaw. The thug curled up in pain. Tears even came out, and that's when Kang Junso realized that he wasn't a pro at all. He was just somewhere on the level of a backyard brat. Jun yelled at the top of his voice for Kang to press him so that he wouldn't have a chance to respond. Kang Junso lightning fast and rather elusive. He got close to the stranger before he could even realize it. His opponent's fist hit him in the nose and blood rushed out. The next attack was in the stomach. and it was very painful for the bulky man. Then to the cheek, and he had to spit out a lot of blood. June finally became more cheerful, saying that Kong Junso was doing well and shouldn't stop, saying that it was the turn of the grunts. He didn't even have time to finish his sentence before one of the hunter-thief characters hit him in the head. June fainted, and that character swore and said he was getting bored with his yelling. The player clucked unhappily. Kong Junso kicked the bulky man with his foot, though this time he managed to block the kick as well. But the blow was strong enough to knock the stranger back. That's when he asked June Grunso? When he turned around, he noticed that the poor fellow was lying unconscious, and that surprised him very much. He realized that this was not at all apropos. Kong Junso felt that nightmarish sensation again. He turned around to look at his opponent. Once again, a huge monster appeared in front of him. Kong Junso smiled and said that everything was under control.